So, today we're peeling back the layers on one of the world's most fascinating and, let's be honest, misunderstood organizations, Freemasonry. But forget everything you think you know. We're not talking about conspiracies or secret plots. Nope. We're getting into the real, honest to goodness, dramatic history of a brotherhood that was once split right down the middle.
Yeah, right off the bat, let's just push all the myths and the mystery to the side. Trust me, the real story here is so much more interesting than any of that stuff. It's a story about tradition versus progress. It's about rebellion and eventually a reunion. And it's a story that completely shaped Freemasonry into what we see today. All right, let's get into it. So, where does this all start? Well, you have to go back to the early 18th century. It was a time of massive intellectual change. We call it the Enlightenment. And that whole new way of thinking, it set the stage for a major transformation inside the craft. And here it is, 1717. This is the moment, the official start date of organized Freemasonry as we really know it. You had 4 lodges in London get together and form the very first Grand Lodge. They would soon be known as the Moderns. So, what were these Moderns all about? Well, they were men of their time, you know? They were all in on reason and science. They wanted to make Masonry more accessible, a bit more polished to appeal to the intellectual elite. So they started to streamline and, from their point of view, improve the old ancient rituals. But as you know, when you start changing tradition, there are always consequences. And that consequence came fast and it was passionate. See, not everyone was on board with this new, modernized Freemasonry. Oh no, a pretty powerful opposition was brewing. It didn't even take that long. Just a few decades after the Moderns set up shop, a rival group formed in 1751. They call themselves the Ancient Grand Lodge. And yeah, they spelled it with a T to really make a point. Their whole mission was to preserve what they saw as the true, untouched traditions of the craft. Okay, so this is really the heart of the matter, right? You've got this fundamental split in how they saw the world. The Moderns saw themselves as evolving, moving things forward for a new age. The Ancients, they saw that as a flat-out betrayal of the core principles. And they weren't alone. The Ancients got a ton of support from working-class Masons, especially guys with Irish and Scottish roots, who really felt the Moderns were just watering down the very soul of Freemasonry. And his quote just nails it, doesn't it? It illustrates the conflict so perfectly. This wasn't some minor disagreement over coffee. It was a deep, ideological split. Both groups genuinely believed they were the true heirs, the rightful protectors of Masonic tradition. And that, of course, led to decades of rivalry. And you better believe this fight didn't just stay in England. As Freemasonry started spreading all over the globe, especially to the American colonies, this conflict came right along with it. It created this really fascinating and kind of complicated Masonic landscape overseas. And this is where the story gets really interesting, structurally speaking. Because this whole division, it actually led to the creation of something called appendant bodies. The best way to think of them is like optional advanced courses, paths a Master Mason could decide to take to explore different sides of Masonic philosophy. This whole situation led to the 2 major appendant bodies we know today, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. Now, while they get along just fine now, their origins are absolutely tied to this old rivalry. So let's break down what each path is all about. First up, the York Rite. This one became super popular in America and England, and its structure is definitely more in line with that Moderns way of thinking. It's often seen as a direct continuation, a logical next step from the stories and lessons you learn in the first 3 degrees of Masonry. Very step by step. But what if you wanted something more? A system that was just vast, with a whole elaborate series of degrees exploring philosophy, history, and ethics. Well, that brings us to this number, 33. Now, here's a fun fact for you. The Scottish Rite isn't from Scotland. Nope, it actually started in France. But its philosophy, it was a perfect match for the ancients. They loved its deep dives into history, its elaborate, almost theatrical rituals, and of course, its huge system of 33 degrees. They felt it brought back a richness the Moderns had tried to strip away. And it's so important to remember, these are seen as further light, not a higher rank than a Master Mason. So for nearly a whole century, these 2 Grand Lodges were bitter rivals. But eventually, the desire for harmony, for unity, it started to become more important than the old arguments. and that led to a truly historic reconciliation. And here's the moment it happened. In 1813, after 96 years, almost a century, of division, the two sides finally came together. This act of union officially ended the Great Schism and kicked off a whole new era for Freemasonry. From this union, they created the United Grand Lodge of England. You'll often hear it called UGLE, and it still exists today. What's so brilliant about it is that they didn't just have one side win. They masterfully blended the traditions of both the ancients and the moderns, creating the foundation for the Freemasonry we see all around the world now.
So the big takeaway here is that the legacy of this old schism is still alive, but in a really positive, healthy way. The York and Scottish rites aren't rivals anymore. They're just two distinct, parallel, and totally valid paths a Mason can take to continue their journey. And, this whole story leaves us with a really powerful question that goes way beyond Masonry, doesn't it? The story of the ancients and the moderns is that classic tale of the tension between holding on to sacred traditions and the need to adapt to a changing world. It's a challenge every single long-lasting institution has to face, and it's definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.